Hello, friends. Welcome to another stream on Wagner Day. I hope that you've been enjoying it so far. And in this stream, we're going to look at a concept which has come up in a number of previous videos. It is Gesamtkunstwerk, the total artwork. This was a very important idea for Wagner. It was what largely motivated his passion for opera, the reason why he wanted to write operas rather than symphonies or do poetry and so on by themselves as a sole sub art. And we're going to look at what he understood that to be, what its purpose was, and then maybe raise some questions about it. As was advertised, this stream was going to be with Panama Hat. Unfortunately, he's unable to make it at the moment, but I'm hopeful that perhaps maybe later in the stream he'll be able to arrive. We shall see. But nonetheless, let us crack on. Can you hear me now? Is that working now? I hope so. Still muted. Are we back? Can you press one if you can hear me? Yes, great. You can hear me now. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. I am very sorry about that. So, um, what I was going to say is that Wagner's conception of the total artwork was that it was a revolutionary approach to art, and it would have revolutionary consequences for the political order. He gains his idea, or he at least roots it, within the Greek tradition. He was very inspired by Greek tragedy, particularly those of Aeschylus. The Orestia he held as one of the greatest works of art in history. And in his pamphlet, uh, Art and Revolution, he writes the following about the performance of the Greek tragedies, how they would have been performed back in ancient times. And I'm going to read the passage. It's a little bit long, but it will help us to see some of the key ideas. Not as the soft companion of the Muses, as the later and more luxurious art of sculpture has alone preserved his likeness, must we conceive the Apollo of the springtime of the Greeks. But it was with all the traits of energetic earnestness, beautiful but strong, that the great tragedian Aeschylus knew him. Thus, too, the Spartan youths learned the nature of the god, when by dance and joust they had developed their supple bodies to grace and strength. When the boy was taken from those he loved and sent on horse to farthest lands in search of perilous adventure. When the young man was led into the circle of fellowship, his only password that of his beauty and his native worth, in which alone lay all his might and all his riches. With such eyes also the Athenians saw the god, when all the impulses of his fair body and of his restless soul urged him to the new birth of his own being through the ideal expression of art. When the voices, ringing full, sounded forth the choral song, singing the deeds of the god, the while they gave to the dancers the mastering measure that meted out the rhythm of the dance, which dance itself in graceful movements told the story of those deeds. And when above the harmony of well-ordered columns he wove the noble roof, heaped one upon the other the broad crescents of the amphitheatre, and planned the scenic trappings of the stage. Thus, too inspired by Dionysius, the tragic poet saw this glorious god, when to all the rich elements of spontaneous art, the harvest of the fairest and most human life, he joined the bond of speech, and concentrating them all into one focus, brought forth the highest conceivable form of art, drama. So, what Wagner's arguing here, that in the ancient Greek context, they when they were performing a tragedy, all of these different art forms would be integrated. So you would have all of the lines he believed, and I think it's been questioned in recent scholarship, but at that he believed, and many other scholars at that time believed that uh, the words would have been sung by the actors. They would have sang what they were, the lines of the Greek tragedy. But also, you would have had the chorus, who was always on stage in the background, providing a, I guess, a commentary on the broader events and indicating the purposes and uh, attitude of the fates or the gods upon the affairs of mortals. You would have also had this would have all been this singing would have been of poetry, that these words were not just a collection of a jumble of lines, and they were not prose, they were verse, they were in meter. This would be combined with dancing on stage. Additionally, you would have costume, and the sets would have been painted with sculptures and columns and so on. So you get these plastic arts, the visual arts, coming into play. For Wagner, all of these become integrated within the Greek tragedy, and they are what in this text, he actually suggests that the combination of all of them, the visual and the heard, is allows for the creation of drama. And so all of these different arts in their various different modes are subordinated to the telling of a story. And that story, of course, is the tragedy that's at stake. And so we can see a very natural comparison here with opera, at least as he conceived of it, that music and verse should be combined together along with the design of sets and so on for the telling of a story. And what's important there is it's not just that you combine all of these things and that makes a total work of art. No, it's actually that they are all in service to the drama, to the revealing of the story in their various modes. We looked at that a little bit in the stream on Wagner's musical techniques and his principles of composition. How he would take a motif, a leitmotif, and this would be associated with a character or a theme or a narrative trope of some kind, and it would come into contact with another leitmotif when another character, theme, or narrative trope comes into play. And then there would be an interplay between these two. They would change each other. They would evolve according to how they are coming into contact with certain musical ideas. And so the music is changing in accordance with what's happening on stage. It's not that it's just accompanying it or providing a nice sense of set of feelings or evoking a set of feelings in the audience. It's actually corresponding to what's taking place in the drama, trying to express that in a melodic and harmonic way. And the same would be true of the sets, for example, that they should be appropriate to the scene that's taking place. So you change the set, etc., etc. One of the important things about this approach to art is that it addresses the whole human being. It doesn't just, and we can see that in terms of the senses, that you have both your eyes and your ears stimulated by what you're experiencing. Indeed, if you were in the amphitheater, you might also have tactile sensation too. You're actually sitting within this building which is designed for this experience. I'm not sure about smell and taste. He doesn't get to those, but I suppose that you could incorporate those in some ways, and certain art installations today would certainly go down that route. I remember one of my siblings went to a dramatic performance of Train Spotting. So I don't know if you know Train Spotting, but it's a film. I think it's based on a book. But it's about kind of druggies in Scotland, essentially. And so my sibling went to this nightclub where they did this performance, and you had to go around the nightclub, and there was parts where you went into the bathroom and the people had thrown up or whatever. So you could get the smell aspect there as well. That might contribute to it. But in general, I don't believe that Wagner incorporated that into his total art. It was really just those arts which already existed, integrating them for the service of the drama. So it stimulates various senses, but it also activates internal faculties as well. They address different faculties. And we can see this if we look at Wagner's idea of language. This is something I've been bringing up throughout the day. You'll be, hopefully, if I get to it enough times, it might stick for some of us. And this was an idea which wasn't original to him. It was developed by scholarship during the period by Johann Gottfried Herder. You had Jacob Grimm. These fellows were looking at the restoration of German language. They wanted to reinvigorate German culture so that they could see a reawakening amongst the German people and thus lead to a better German society. And this was all tied in with various understandings of German nationalism, which we touched on earlier. But they believed language was one of the last things which connected the German people today with their forebears. Everything else had been eroded and corrupted by modernity, by alien civilizational values, and so on, to the true civilization proceeding from the German people's nature. But language maintains, and also language is tied into stories, right? That's what sustains the language. So you have to study the mythology to understand the resonances, the key concepts, the grammar of the language, and so on. And this was a point that Tolkien made as well. So what do Herder and Grimm kind of conclude about this? Well, they argued that the original languages, the primordial languages, combined two things together. One of them we're very used to. When you use a noun, it denotes an object. So I say, take this picture here. This picture, I say this picture, and you know I'm referring to this object. And that's very clear. That's part of those ancient languages. But at the same time, they believed that the words that ancient peoples used also included the subjective experience implied by that object, or usually associated with it. This idea was kind of developed by somebody called Owen Barfield, who was a member of the Inklings. He was a good friend of J.R.R. Tolkien's. And he talked about original participation. For the ancients, the words wind, breath, and spirit were all the same. So when you used them, it had all of the meanings together. The wind wasn't just like the breath of a god, it was the breath of God, while your spirit is your breath. And what does the Bible say? The spirit blows where it pleases. It's like the wind. So there's this connection of these ideas, and what you're doing is taking an abstract concept like spirit and giving it a sensory quality. It's like breath, it's like wind. So that's what the ancients would have been, how they engaged with the world. They didn't just have this very objective sense, representational, where everything is kind of neutral and your subjective experience just belongs to you. In a sense, it actually belongs with the object itself, and you're not just it's not just causing an experience in you. That's actually a quality it has, which then you're apprehending. Wagner acknowledges this aspect of ancient languages. If I can find my right book, he says the following after reading Jacob Grimm's study of language. If we look closely at the evolutionary history of modern languages, we meet in their so-called word roots a rudiment that plainly shows us how at the first beginning the formation of the mental concept of an object ran almost completely parallel with the subjective feeling of it. And Roger Scruton, in the book that I'm using here, he goes on to say, if you think of the Rhine daughters or the Valkyrie, when they first come on stage, they're not singing actual words. It's things like Wea, Waga, ha ha ha, ha ha ha. So that what you're getting there isn't you're getting something which is conveying their very character. It's providing it's revealing their very essence to you in a very powerful way. So then let's combine this with what Wagner does, because he recognizes that post Kant we don't share that worldview of original participation. Everything to us, we have this idea that our senses and our interior faculties shape the experiences that we have. And that means that we can never apprehend things in themselves. We just receive our own subjective experiences of them. We never know them truly beyond our experience. But how do you convey then the moral qualities or the characteristics of an object or a character in that sort of way, where we have this very sharp division between objective and subjective. It's through the total artwork. How does he do this? Well, he writes the poetry, the prose, and the verse. And for Wagner, that addresses the mind. And you can put it like this: the words fix our attention upon specific objects, usually, at least in this context. So the words of the singers on the stage tell us that Wotan has a certain relationship to Fricka. He's got a certain dealing with the giants, and so it's telling us a particular story. These aren't abstract concepts. We're supposed to think of them as concrete characters in concrete relationships. And so that's something that our intellect can fathom. But music has a very different quality. And Wagner had something to say on it, which I think was quite profound. And it's a view that he maintains even after he's read Schopenhauer, because Schopenhauer largely agreed with it. He writes the following about music: "It speaks not of the passion, love, and longing of this or that individual in this or that situation, but of passion, love, and longing in themselves." What does that mean? Well, if you think of a melody abstracted from any words or any visual context, what do you have? You have a melody in harmony which can arouse certain feelings within you, which correspond to its movement, but there's no concrete objects to which they are tied to. So if somebody plays a melody to you, it's totally cut off from all other situations. It's not like a painting where it's representing specific forms which are in reference to other specific forms, right? So when you see Mary and the Christ child, that's not just woman in the abstract. That's Mary, the mother of God, with Jesus, the Son of God. There's a particularity there that's being represented. It's has to refer to something beyond itself, whereas music doesn't need to refer to something beyond itself to have meaning. It's internal parts in conjunction together. The directionality of the melody is enough for it to be beautiful. It can exist in a vacuum, is what I'm trying to say, and still have significance for us. It can still move us as a consequence. Whereas you need to understand who's in that painting for it to have that effect upon you, or at least have some conception of what's being represented. I think as a consequence then, when you combine words and music, something interesting happens. The music can arouse the feeling of happiness in itself without reference to anything else. But if you put it to words, that then focuses that feeling in connection with a concrete event or situation. So if we just had the music of Wagner without the words and without the drama, it could arouse in us a variety of emotions, unconnected to anything else. But when you put them to words and you put them to staging, suddenly the music and the emotions they arouse, we connect to what's taking place on stage. And so you have that which addresses the mind, the poetry and the verse, combined with that which addresses the heart, which is the music. And so together you get the objective and the subjective. You get the feeling of the thing as your mind is comprehending the thing at the same time. So Wagner, in his view, has managed to overcome this divide between the objective and the subjective, bring them back together through the power of verse put to music, through the total artwork. And I think this is something that we can see in film as well. That think of something like the Lord of the Rings. The it's If you just take it visually, it is a stunning work. It has great landscapes, beautiful sets, amazing props and costumes. But the thing which enables it to really impact us is its music. But what the music does is it conveys to us certain feelings which the Howard Shaw has managed to tie, or they when they are set to the visuals, they tie them together. So we listen to the music of the Shire by itself. If you've never seen the Shire, it could be very pleasant. But with the Shire itself, when you're seeing those green, pleasant rolling hills and agricultural communities, it arouses a feeling within you, which gives you a kind of felt knowledge of what that place is like. It's kind of giving you the essence of it through the music, and so that elevates the film in a way. I've often made the argument, and that if the Lord of the Rings had been set to different music, to lesser music, it would have suffered more than if the visuals had not been as good. Because I think it's the music of the film which really, really moves an audience in a very powerful way. So that is kind of one of the strengths of the total artwork, that it can address the whole human being and thus move the whole human being. And so that maybe is a good time to talk about, well, what then was the purpose of this? Why would you want to do that? Well, for Wagner, he believed that art had an important role within the life of the community, that it wasn't just something for the individual to get entertainment from. It wasn't something that should be just enjoyed by oneself or even by a small group. When he looked at Greek tragedy, he noted that the whole community would stop what they were doing for the day. They would devote all of their activities to running and observing the Greek tragedy. The whole polis would come to the amphitheatre to watch together stories produced by their civilization, stories which accorded with their own nature and with nature more broadly. And as such, he writes the following about what that kind of experience would have been like. With the Greeks, the perfect an epitome of all that was expressible in the Grecian nature. It was the nation itself, in intimate connection with its own history, that stood mirrored in its artwork, that communed with itself, and within the span of a few hours, feasted its eyes within its own noblest essence. So art has an important revelatory function within society, because it can reveal to a people who they truly are when it is in accordance with their nature, when it organically arises from what kind of from their ethnoculture, you might say. And that was the case for Greek tragedy. It captured their somewhat melancholic acceptance of the suffering and tragedy of life. It was rooted in the places around them, the mythological concepts that they had, and so on. In his own day, Wagner believed that the art that was being produced by most people did not do this. It was primarily motivated by profit. The artist was just trying to make money out of their creation. And so rather than seeking to express something of the German people, actually they were expressing something antithetical to German nature. And this is, I didn't get time to go into this in full earlier, But it's because of the nature of what German culture is that it's antithetical to this. Essentially, he believed that German culture was a hybrid of, and the German ethnoculture, I should say, of classical civilization, Teutonic civilization, and Christian civilization. And all three come together and they produce a civilization where individuals have become conscious of the fact of their own suffering in the world. They're aware of who they are, of reality, and its tragic nature. They are also aware of the need for compassion. And so this perspective is the highest perspective in all of human existence. And as a consequence, it's something that needs to be spread around all of the world. German culture, as a consequence, is needs to be exported. Now, in this idea, then you have this very strong sense of moving away from the original innocent state, the lower forms of civilization, which focus upon the ego, the desire for power, for property, for wealth, towards the life of love, of self-sacrifice. He even talks about cutting off myself to be for the other. And that can be your family, your nation, humanity more generally. For Wagner, then, and this is a process which ought to characterize growing up as well. When we start out young, we're only really concerned with our own desires. We don't think of other people. As we grow, we become more and more aware of the other. And the achievement of the Germans is that they come to that, or German culture, is it expressed through its art the need to sacrifice the self for the other. We'll be seeing more about this in Parsifal, the next stream. But what's the significance of that? Well, if your art is produced for the acquiring of wealth, if it is just a tool of power, then by its very nature, no matter what you display, it's going to be antithetical to the very essence of true German nature. Thus, it needs to be eradicated and replaced by an art which fulfills that function. It has an almost religious role, then. It should be the central ritual within the community, the performance of its art. And we see this in Greek tragedy. Wagner believed that it came to replace some of the ancient Greek rites which had become defunct, or at least it came from them. The Meistersingers, in his opera The Meistersingers, the community of Nuremberg meet every year to sing songs together, led by the Master Singers Guild, not for profit. They're not paid for it. They have other jobs. They're just doing it out of their love of beauty. And in a way, the Bayreuth festival, this operatic scene which Wagner had built for the performance of his operas, was meant to be such a place as well. It was meant to be the place where total art was presented to the German people for the reawakening of themselves. This didn't quite work out for a number of reasons. One is they had to get paid. They couldn't run it for free. Although Wagner did manage to have various scholarships for this purpose. There was it's interesting that a number of people during the day have described it as almost like a temple, a holy temple, where the high priest Wagner leads the people in a reconnection with who they are. And this might tie in with perhaps the last thing that we can really talk about tonight on total art. In Wagner's view, art as he conceived of it was what religion should have been, or what religion is at its best. but religion has fallen from its proper task. This is because, in his view, religions present in a figurative way deep truths about ourselves. Religions present to us in a figurative way deep truths about ourselves. He points to something like Raphael's Sistine Madonna, this beautiful painting of the Virgin and Christ child. He says that she is a figure, an allegory, with her son for divine love, which sacrifices itself on behalf of the human race. In so doing, it reveals the importance of love and the resignation of the will, compassion, and so on. But the problem with religion for Wagner is that its priests want to dogmatize these truths. It wants us to believe that these things are literal. In so doing, it creates an artificial relationship to these deep truths about ourselves, about our communities, about our nation, our people. And so it's always had to draw on art to retain that sense of the sacred, as he would see it. Given the decline in religious belief during the 19th century, since God, you had your Feuerbachs and so on, who had challenged religion as really an expression of our deepest needs, but which had been taken as literal rather than as what it is. Wagner's saying, well, actually, art should be that thing in its place, doing its proper role, expressing the needs and values, desires, characteristics of the people, of the Volk. And in so doing, it will provide that sacred ritual which is required by human beings. We cannot just expunge religion. We need this sense of the sacred. And that is what the total work of art achieves. By stimulating all of our senses, our internal faculties, it addresses our whole being, awakens things within our deep unconscious, both as individuals and as a people. In so doing, then, it becomes the very lifeblood of the society. That's why it should be the highest thing. That's why it has an almost religious significance, conveying the sacred. I think perhaps the closest thing that we can see to this, to this in the modern world, is the royal coronation that took place a few weeks ago in the United Kingdom. Many of the people taking part did not necessarily believe in the actual doctrinal statements being made, or the oaths which demand that Charles uphold the Church of England, true religion, and justice within the realm, that he should go and administer these things. It wasn't like that. Rather, this was, if we took a Wagnerian interpretation, this was a figurative portrayal through various actors, with music, with sets, with costumes, with prose and verse, a total artwork reflecting to the British people who they are. And I think that's why it stimulated and evoked powerful emotions in many of the folk that watched. And indeed, many people in the United Kingdom and around the world gathered together around television screens to watch it. So that's kind of the closest we could get to. I'm afraid. Oh, here we go. Hello, Panama Hat. How are you doing?
Hello. Not frightfully well, I'm afraid. Essentially, I apologize very deeply for. I mean, I'm not even really late. I've basically missed the whole thing, but I had to go and pick up relatives from the train station last minute, and of course, on this particular day, they decided to do roadworks in the middle of town. So I was more or less stranded on the road. Not a brilliant time.
I'm sorry to hear that, and I'm glad you came in to explain, and
better late than never, I suppose. So.
Well, we're literally just about to wrap up, but we do have
Okay.
one super chat. Alice Liddell, 1872, for £2. The music in Alien, 1979, made the film. I think that's probably a fair comment. But before we go off, Hat, is there anything that you would want to say about the total artwork?
What I would like to say, and I'll try and keep this brief, is that I think a lot of the academic focus on it has actually been a little bit limited. And I think that one of the most interesting developments in Western kind of art, I suppose, is how early cinema kind of began as almost a Wagnerian project of blending together all this stuff. I think the chief example would be something like Abel Gantz's Napoleon from 1927. I would say look it up and watch it, but the problem is, in order to do it properly, you need basically 3 projector screens across, and it was basically kind of, it almost took the Wagnerian principle to a sort of absurd limit where, he would blend cinema with reality. But there's like for example, there's a scene during the French Revolution where all of the deputies, who just overthrown the king, start singing the Marseillaise, for example, and Gantz insisted that in the cinema, copies of the lyrics should be handed out among the audience, and everyone would have to sort of stand up and join in, that sort of thing. And he would kind of have the music, there'd be an orchestra and everything, and so essentially, very, very condensed point of what I was going to make on the stream, but yes, I think that total art, as Wagner envisaged it, has yet been unexplored properly. I think there is actually still a gap between what he wanted and what he was able to do in his own operas, especially the Ring Cycle, and what has actually been done in art since. I think cinema in particular has really, really lost any of the early qualities it had, because it just became kind of like cheap, easy entertainment for the masses. Whereas I think it could be something approaching the Wagnerian vision of total art, where you blend every possible form of sensory experience into one. Before to use to use the phrase that Gantz used to describe his films, before the audience goes back out into the hell of the real world, basically.
I totally agree with you that it feels like that it as you said, it's a kind of shallow experience almost in the cinema today. With it's not so much a true escape into the aesthetic attitude. It's not just a disinterested engagement with art in all of its fullness. It feels like it's just pleasure that you're trying to get.
Yes.
So it feels like it's got a very different function.
Very much so. Very much so.
Well, with that stimulating thought, that maybe would have been good for, well, maybe people could go away and think about it, because I think there is something there. Thank you everybody for joining. We'll be back live again in 10 minutes discussing Parsifal. And thank you, Panaf Mahat, for making it. I do appreciate it.
I apologize again to you and to the audience for that, but yes.
No problem. See you all in a few minutes. Bye for now.